Hello, my name is Morteza, and this is my 30-second portrait. All right, and we are traveling back in time. The unknown is so uncomfortable, you know?
Probably from the first moment that I met you, I could already tell that you were passionate, focused, and creative. I think creative is probably the main word that I would use to describe you. So we met each other on the street, and I was like, this guy's got this creative vibe. I'm feeling it, you know, from one creative to another. I was like, I'm feeling the creative energy. I was like, he's an interesting person, and
Thank you.
that's why I feel like any kind of structure is maybe it's limiting. You know, let's just see where it goes and kind of explore that way. And besides, I think the things that I'm really keen to find out more about is a little bit about your story. I want to have an opportunity to unpack some of the little stories and the little anecdotes that you've told me. You're so good at coming up with little metaphors as well. I feel like the Think Visual community would benefit massively if they could hear some of those little stories and just your experiences. Your experiences are so unique. And I know in the community of it, you've spoken about some parts of it, but we'll kind of dig into a few of those things. And then maybe we'll unpack a bit more about I think this concept of living design.
Yes,
it's curious, and I want to understand why you call it living design. But why don't we look a little bit about your beginnings? I think it's a great way to understand somebody in some ways, is to understand how things began, and it's just so they get this idea of where things and where some of that spark comes from. I've always been fascinated by that anyway. So why don't you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, where did it begin? Yeah, I would say that in younger ages, I was very playful with the stuff that was coming my way. I wouldn't accept things in their face value and sort of accept them the way they are. I always was like changing stuff. We had a very interesting rule at our home, which I feel so blessed being in that family. The rule was I get to disassemble and reassemble every appliance that was bought in the home. And that was just me with a couple of screwdrivers and the old pair of pliers sitting in the corner, taking the next hairdryer apart and figuring it out. I did get electrocuted a couple of times, to be honest, but it was just my joy to see how things work and putting them together again. No mishaps. I only once destroyed a Polaroid camera that my dad's friend bought for him from Germany as a gift, and I destroyed it because I disassembled it and I got fascinated with the lenses, and I took the lens to the court, sort of to the garden, to start burning ants with it with the sunlight, and I forgot about the whole mess on the balcony that I made with the camera parts around. And yeah, that was a big drama at home. But other than that, generally worked well. You usually end up with a couple of extra screws, but that wasn't such of a biggie. But yeah, for me, this playfulness and figuring things out and being allowed to sort of play with things was quite important in my early days. And my dad always sort of gave me that opportunity to do that, even in his own line of work. He was a producer at radio, sort of broadcasting for the national TV and radio channel. So I would play around with the like mixing decks, and I would enjoy like doing simple tasks, but I always was allowed to experience these things and find out about them. And that playfulness always stayed with me, I would say, was a great help for me to get into experiencing new things. I remember first time somebody bought me, for example, a plastic boomerang as a toy, and I, because the in the carpet weaving business we had the plywood that we would stick the paper patterns on them, just glue them. And I remember I took the plastic boomerang as a kid, and I was like, can I make a similar one? And I outlined exactly the same form, and I cut it in my dad's workshop, and it worked with the plywood. It still came back. So I realized it's about the form and not the material. So I started experiencing with that, making different shapes and different forms and different things. And that was like my activity for quite a while, just making different boomerangs to see which one actually works better. So I had that sort of a space to play around with these things. And I remember in the sort of animation and advertising business that I had, my dad was the front of the house. So because I was too young to work with any client seriously, really, so he would sit in the front, and I had my back office with uh, my staff working together on the animation. And every time he called me and said, "Hey, Morteza, what are you doing?" I would reply by playing, and he laughed it off because sometimes clients would be there and hear that Morteza is playing instead of delivering their work. But for me, that was the job, to play around with things and figure things out. And that I think was a good learning curve for me, both to find out how things work, but also find out how design works in general. And I kept that mindset. I've tried to maintain that mindset as much as possible. Even now, I don't jump on the most obvious solution. And quite often, you see this works very well. A recent example that I can think of, and I know you want the childhood stories, but I'm just trying to think of something that recently happened out of this playfulness. Like a few years ago, we were looking for a new site for a factory. In Sydney, the company I used to work for wanted to establish a factory for manufacturing cases, and they were thinking about finding a new warehouse. And every candidate place that we found uh, as a sort of a warehouse to start the factory plant, I had to kind of sketch up the footprint, how the factory floor, the production line would work in this footprint. And eventually, one time, in the big warehouse that the company had, the headquarters, uh, the fire consultant was explaining how people should not cross the forklift path in the main warehouse. And out of just playing around, really, I was like, it seems like we should put like some footpaths, or like overhead footpaths for the staff to cross. And that suddenly became for me, hey, if we just expand this, we can create like a second layer in the warehouse, and that could move all the stock to the upper layer, and we can use the floor for factory. Long story short, we, instead of renting or buying a new factory floor, we suddenly had double the footprint. So we established the factory production line on the ground floor and moved all the stock to the mezzanine upstairs, and it worked very well for 5 years, until recently they moved the factory to a bigger plant. But it all came out of that sense of, instead of just looking for another solution and finding the right place to rent or buy, how about just think about, play around with the idea, see if, do we really need, or can we just make a funny thing, and then that funny thing suddenly becomes the solution. So I always have this feeling since childhood that uh, the best strategy is not necessarily the straight line, the in uh, trigonometry and geometry, they call it the donkey principle. The shortest path to the uh, fruit is usually to the carrot. The shortest path to the carrot is the straight path. But in design, I sometimes feel like the shortest path is not the straight path. You just need to look around a little bit, and you usually find a new dimension that is not on the flat surface at all. And that gives you quite a completely different notion of what it means to solve the problem. That's always fascinating to me.
I wanted to ask you, just based on something that you said, for clarification, why is it important not to go with the first idea or the first shiny thing that pops into mind? Why is it important to explore?
Well, for once, the first ideas are usually very trivial. And uh, you think about them just because all the backgrounds and biases that you have, and those are quite common in people in a sense, and everybody can come up with them. So as a professional, you don't want that trivial thing. If you come up with the same idea as your uh, the person who has commissioned you for a project, then you're not bringing much value. We already knew the solution. And there is an art to selling your idea, even if they come up with it as well. But it's not really problem solving, in a sense of creative problem solving. So for me, the initial trivial ideas are not always the best. And I think I love this quote from Muhammad Ali, the boxer, that says he was doing push-ups, and somebody asked him, an interviewer, how many push-ups have you done? And he replies, I start counting when it starts hurting. I think the early ideas are always warm-ups. They're rarely the ones that count. And as a designer, it's important to go through them. You cannot skip them really, but you do want to push it to where it starts hurting and becomes challenging. And that is where the good ideas, the creative ideas, usually are born.
I like that. I like that. It seems quite evident that um, play and creativity have very big part to play in who you are. Can you kind of create a little definition around play, and then a definition around creativity? And uh, I want to kind of describe what is it when we talk about play, and what is it when we talk about creativity, and then why are those things so valuable to us today?
Well, playfulness is a state of exploration without worrying about failure, really. If you allow yourself to act without worrying about failure, you are playing. And that's that sense of kids do it the best, obviously, with playing, because they build and they break. They make it and they break it because it's part of the play. You never fixate things. The first Lego movie was very interesting, not to super glue the parts together. That concept of super gluing your solution is really the core of it. It takes all the playfulness out of it if you super glue your Lego build. So I like to define playfulness as an exploration without worrying about failing, and with assumption that you will destroy the results after you explore the space. And for creativity, there is like academically, we have three qualifiers or three metrics that we evaluate creativity for. And the first one is novelty. And that's kind of a common sense that everybody understands that creative ideas need to be new and novel. But that is not the only qualifier for a creative idea. Because imagine if you are walking on a straight path, and every step that you take is new to the previous ones. So you're always moving forward, and every step is a novel step in a sense. But because I can assume your trajectory and I can assume your next step, I do not observe that as a creative task. Creativity comes to play when the next step that you take is also surprising. So if people can mm, assume what would be the next step or the next solution, it's not necessarily creative. That's a very trivial solution if everybody can estimate your next move. Creative ideas have this second qualifier or second metric to them where they need to be surprising. And that surprise is a big element in evaluating how creative you are, not just new ideas, which is again a big differentiator between what psychologists know as creativity, because they have this notion of just counting your ideas and evaluating your creativity as how many novel ideas can you generate. But it stops there in psychology. They don't look at the other factors that are important for creativity, including surprise. And the famous test that psychologists do for testing creativity is what is called alternative uses. Basically, they name an element and they say, hey, you have this simple object or this simple element. How many alternative uses can you think about for a brick or a pin, for example? And usually, normal people would come up with 10 to 15 uses for a pin, for example, in a minute. Including pinning things on the wall, poking people, scratching things. These are the uses that a normal person would think about. A creative person would go beyond that, think about different materials, different sizes for the pin, and they would come up with more. There is an option for making pinnacle and pineapple with pin as well that nobody thinks about. But when I say, hey, what are the alternative uses for a pin? If you say pineapple and pinnacle, suddenly you have broken through the notion of the word and you're thinking of the notion of the form, and you're thinking about the word and using the alphabet letters for it. And suddenly it's surprising there. That is for me the real creativity, but the psychologists do not sort of register that in their test. They just count the number of ideas that you come up with, which is a few more for creative people. The third metric in evaluating creativity is what is known as value, and it becomes more and more important in recent years because the way the social context that we have, highly connected social fabric to these days, which is, if your idea is new and it's surprising, still needs some sort of valuation and validation from the outside world, from the context and the community to which you introduce your idea, and that's the third metric for the creativity. Doesn't mean the person is not creative. We have what is called the psychological creativity. Every kid comes up with new ideas at different ages, and you as a parent are very proud that your kid came up with that idea at age of 3. But it doesn't mean that they are creative in their own world, but it doesn't mean that idea is new to the world. Every other kid at the age of 3 comes up with the same way of putting their shoes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a personal or psychological creativity, but it's not social creativity or historical creativity, as academics call it. So the third highly regarded metric for creativity is to think about the value and validation that comes from the social context and the way it becomes valuable for everybody else. And that has become more and more important because, for example, with use of AI, you can just generate a lot of new stuff. But whether they are necessarily surprising or whether it is necessarily valuable is a place of question, because it just does the random generation, which means every new sort of output is novel. And it might be sometimes surprising, even though if you really have a good grasp on the training data, it highly becomes predictable in a sense. But at the same time, the third and highest qualifier is how valuable that is. And that's very human for us because everybody else in the community needs to see that value in it.
I think the definitions around that help. I think it's useful in helping us gauge why it is valuable today. And actually, maybe just really quickly, why do you think play and creativity are still valuable, or do you think they are still valuable?
I think they are very valuable for multiple reasons, but I think that the most fundamental reason that I appreciate creativity and playfulness is for it being human.
Mm-hmm.
If you study design and the cognitive side of design problem solving, you would realize that designing as a mental activity actually involves almost all your complex or higher level functions, cognitive functions. And these higher level cognitive functions are things that we develop with age. And we pretty much always are developing these capabilities throughout our life. I give you an example. There is this high level cognitive ability which is called theory of mind, thinking about others having their own minds. Now, if you test this on a kid under 3 years, you will get a different result. And if you do the same test with a kid older than 3 or 4 years, you will get a different result. And the test is you put two kids in the same room and you put a chocolate under a cup, for example, and then ask one of the kids to leave the room. And while the other person is outside in front of one of the kids who has stayed at the table, you put the chocolate in your pocket and then invite the other person in. You ask the kid who just witnessed you removing the chocolate from under the cup, you ask the kid, where do you think the other person would think the chocolate is? Because the kid in young age doesn't have a theory of mind that others have the mind of their own and the memories and experiences of their own. They would always say what they think is right, which is, oh, there is no chocolate under the cup, it's in your pocket. But as the kids get older, you do the same test and they say, well, the person didn't see you remove the chocolate from under the cup. So they would say it's under the cup. I know it's in your pocket, but he has a different mindset.
Yeah.
So that's called theory of mind. And these kind of high level cognitive abilities, you keep developing them in different ages. And some of the complex ones you could get those sort of find that ability in ages of 20 to 25, and throughout your life you are perfecting them basically. Now this kind of ability, almost the whole set is contributing to design problem solving. So for me, design creativity is very human because it engages a lot of high level cognitive activities that we have. And it's like, for me, the definition of being a human, yes, of course, it's like the comparison between a camera, photography, and painting. Your phone digital camera might take quite good photos, but what you see in a painting is the human side of it. And I don't want to give that away, no matter how good and detailed the photo is. It's not about the resolution of the picture, it's about the creation by a human. And I think design, being involved with so many different cognitive activities and abilities, is one of those kind of things that we want to keep to ourselves, no matter how good the resolution is on using the other tools and machines for it.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because I can see I see a significant shift in thinking, um, in in the, I think, in the students and the young designers that I've met. Not all of them, but many. I would say it's becoming fast becoming a norm, in that many young people are farming out their initial ideas, um, their ideation to AI, and then mistaking that as their own.
Mm.
So, in some ways, they've asked AI to do this thinking, and then they bring it back, and they assume that we should receive that as if that was completely their own idea, um, even though usually what's happened is it's not a dialogue; it's like a short prompt, and AI is incredibly good at spitting out vast, detailed quantities of information. Um, but what I've seen is that the minds are being shaped by this action, and um, the subsequent questioning, like, okay, what have you learned? What have you understood about this? Is getting less and less, because if you haven't generated this information on your own, if you haven't used creativity and playfulness, and if you haven't used those things that you've talked about, the essence of being human, to look deeply at a problem, then you are not contributing to to the thing. You, in fact, it's the opposite is true. But this has been my experience, and again, I know you're also a teacher of many years. What has been your experience, and have you seen this as have you experienced this?
Yes, a lot. Of course, at the university, especially these days. And the two moments of revelation for me, one was a few years ago when just ChatGPT got introduced. And back then I was teaching to IT students for technology design project. And for one semester, almost all the students used AI to generate the reports, which was just being introduced and is still not as popular back in the day. But at the same time, the university kind of supported the idea of evaluating the student work using AI. And it was a revelation moment for me when I realized that the student submissions are generated by AI, and the evaluation of it is done by AI on my side. So where is the learning? And why are we here anymore? It's, even though that transactionally it's being done, but end of the day, we don't come to the university, and education and learning is there for a reason, for making us know better. And if you bring AI to both sides, it just removes that from it. And then we can all go home and not do any of that, that the learning gets diminished.
Yeah.
Another more sort of technical and operational issue that I saw was about a year ago at business school. And we had the students working on entrepreneurship and like startup ideas. And we allowed them to visualize their ideas using AI because they don't have as many skill set for visualizing things. So it was okay to use AI. But what they did was pretty in a sense and attractive visually. But when you compare the visualization with their concept that they came up with, there was little correspondence between those two. So while it looked pretty, it wasn't what they had in mind. So even as a tool for like visualizing and externalizing your idea, it's a big challenge to get to AI to understand what you mean by your prompts. And when I look at successful artists who use AI to generate attractive art, let's say, in a very subjective way, uh, you will realize that there is an artistry even in using AI, and AI becomes just another tool for their creation. This is not different from the way we use any other digital tool for creating work, but it's not the actual act of creation. And there is a skill set to using that as well. And I think while you are a junior designer or a student in the design domain, it's more and more important to learn the skill before you jump onto using AI. And for the employers on the other side, it also becomes a challenge. I had this conversation with a lawyer a while back because I do like text analysis, protocol analysis, which is very close to large language models. And he was asking me, how can we use AI to replace our junior paralegal staff and just employ the senior ones, because AI is supposedly able to do the junior work. And my question was, so if you don't train and employ the junior staff now, how do you expect getting senior staff in 5 years? You're destroying your own industry by doing this, because the people do not suddenly become senior staff. They go through these stages. And we all know work experience is something quite different from education. So that needs to be something that both sides think about. We as practitioners and service providers in the industry, but also the employers and clients, that there's a sweet point between how much you can use AI for and the human element of it. And I think that's part of the bigger picture for me. That's why I always think design needs to be looked at from different vantage points rather than just a singular view. Otherwise, you will miss a lot of things around the idea of designing.
On the topic that you mentioned around visualization, I've seen I've seen you visualize, and I've seen kind of your work evolve to, not that you haven't been visualizing since you were very little, but I've just seen your thinking on paper and clarifying the clarification of ideas, or even just the exploration of ideas. And I suppose the question that I have for you is, in this kind of evolving age that we live in, what do you think is the value of visualization or using visual thinking, in general? Like, do you think there is a value?
Well, definitely. I think visual thinking is the thinking part of it is quite important for me. And I consider visualization just another way or medium for externalization of ideas and concepts. And I consider 4 different reasons for this externalization to happen. The first reason is what we know as reflection on or reflection in action, which is basically thinking with your hands. It's just bringing the ideas from your internal world or your interpreted world inside your brain to the external world. Helps you look at the idea from a third person's point of view, and that's part of the thinking process as far as we know. So we call it thinking with your hands, right? So visualization allows you to do that, which is very personal. Additionally, visualization is a direct way of communication. With language, you have this barrier of arbitrary symbols in between, because language is a made-up thing. So you have the concept, you associate the concept to a word, and then I have to decode that as the receiver or the audience of what you say. But when it's visual, it's a direct understanding of what you mean. So it doesn't have that encoding and decoding process in between, which makes it a much better way of communication with others. It's more direct and intuitive in a sense. The third way is by visualizing or externalizing your idea in this way, you are exposing your idea to others' judgment. If you want others to evaluate and validate your idea, visualization is the best way to do it. It's like a musician asking people to comment about their song by looking at the note sheet versus actually playing the song. The, for music, playing the song is the way you get others to react to it. And for design, I think visualization is the way you can ask for that validation and that judgment to begin with. And the fourth reason for externalization, or specifically visualization, that I can think about is what I call wordizing, which is a word or a term that I borrow from the world of sound design and production. Basically, in sound design, whatever studio recorded sound or Foley sound they have, they usually play it back to the space and where the video was recorded, and they record it back to the system. And this is not necessarily to listen to the sounds, but rather it allows the sound to take a flavor of the reality when it's recorded back to the system. And this is very important for externalization and visualization in design, because it doesn't necessarily rely on the person as the designer or others as the way of communication, but it's just about the idea itself. Once the idea becomes externalized through visualization or any other means of prototyping, it basically takes a flavor of reality with all the constraints and limitations that reality imposes on the idea. And that understanding, that new version of the idea which has taken the flavor of reality, is quite different from what it was in the designer's mind and brain. And I think this fourth reason behind the visualization makes it quite a strong case next to the communication and testability, and also a reflection makes a very strong case for design to be externalized and visualized as much as possible in our daily practice.
That's fantastic. I love that term. Wordizing. Morteza, you, to my understanding, you are writing a book. Your book is kind of summarizes many of these things that we've talked about today. It seems, or not, maybe not summarizes, but includes many of the things that we've talked about today. And you've called it living design. Why have you called it living design? And can you tell me a little bit about a little bit about what you aim to do with this book?
Sure. Well, the reason behind the name is a very fundamental belief that I have about designing, kind of extending outside the perimeters of your work office or the templates and tools that we usually use in the world of design. For me, design comes from 6 different perspectives, and you can look at design from these vantage points. And we traditionally know design, a very popular perspective or vantage point for looking at design is the product or the result of design, the solution that we have. But we also can look at design from other vantage points, including the process, which again is very popular. We can look at it from the person or the designer, the people, how others evaluate design and value the work of design. We can look at it from the problem point of view, and also from the program or the use of tools, and including AI in the design process. And for me, design becomes this full package, which the range of which and the gamut of which is way beyond starting at 9 and finishing at 5 p.m. As a designer, you cannot clock off your brain and kind of go home and not think about the problem anymore. You live and breathe designing. You become judgmental against everything that you see. You're a visual designer. Every visualization that you see, you have at the back of your mind that evaluation of, oh, they could have done it better. That is a curse of design, really. As an industrial designer, you never sit on a chair not evaluating how comfortable it is, right? So this is part of the reason I like to call it design, to denote the fact that design goes beyond the traditional job description for us, but also to show the fact that design is beyond just a tool or a process or the product of it, but it's more involved activity that considers other vantage points within its range.
And Morteza, regarding um, the book, regarding the book, what are your hopes that it will do? Like, as you begin the kind of journey of putting this together, what are your hopes? What do you hope that it will communicate? What do you hope that it will affect? How do you hope that it might affect people?
Well, I think one of the biggest impacts I hope for through the book is to bring some new notion of design as a way of living, as a set of behaviors and strategies to the life of especially young designers, because experienced designers, through research, we know that they have gained these skills and behaviors. They have developed them throughout years of experience. But for young designers and junior designers and students, this is still something to be developed. And because the education system usually relies heavily either on the product side of the solution, the outcome of the design projects, or on the processes and templates and tools that is being taught at universities, we rarely, as young designers, we get exposed to these other vantage points around our practice. And I hope I can show some of these practices that a designer can take in. And the end result is always to be able to build your own personality as a practitioner. It doesn't mean you need to strictly follow this regiment. I love this poem by the Pakistani poet Muhammad Iqbal, who the poem is in Persian. That's how I can translate it. But the poem says, I can teach you how to make masks, only to hope one day for you to make your own face. And I think that's the core of the book, really. I tell you about all the masks you can make, but the end hope for is that one day you will make your own persona, your own self as a design practitioner, really. And I hope we can develop these behaviors more and more in our practice, because that's what makes us human.
That makes a lot of sense. I loved everything that you talk about. I think if you more than most people that I've met, you seem to embody the idea of living design. So I'm really looking forward to maybe collaborating on this thing with you,
Sure.
and finding out just more about your ideas of design. But I think that's all we've got time for today. So thank you so much, Morteza. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.